Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So we are, as you can see, in Parshat vaYishlach, and essentially it started off with the encounter that Jacob has with Esau. And we have gone quite a bit into this parsha. As you can see, we're almost at the sixth Aliyah Shishi. And here we have, as you'll see, that God appears to Jacob and he confirms the blessing which the angel, remember we had the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. And I'll deal with that just in a moment, just sort of in passing, although we dealt with it specifically at that particular lesson. Um, at any rate, of course, what happens at the end is that the angel gives Jacob a new name of Yisrael, Yisrael. And here God is going to confirm that, but with additional blessings. The term Yisrael, okay, so obviously the Yisrael of Yisrael has to do with wrestling, right? The idea of wrestling. The word El doesn't here mean God. A lot of people like to use this word to mean, wrestling with God. It is not. And Ale here, at least the tradition, this is the traditional understanding of it, means wrestling with divine beings. The angel, according to tradition, that Jacob wrestled with was Esau's guardian angel. So there is a well-established tradition of somewhat ancient quality of saying that each one of us has a guardian angel. And of course, that begs further deconstruction as to how we understand why people would come up with that kind of concept. But again, if religion is about significance and things like that, the notion of a guardian angel, I think it has some relevance to that particular concept. But the fact is that Jacob was able to overcome the guardian angel of Esau. And that is very, very symbolic, right, of this constant tug uh, between perhaps the physical world and the Jewish concept of spirituality, right? That tug. At any rate, let's get into the text itself. Vayomer lo Elohim. So God said to him, Ani El Shaddai. I am El Shaddai. I'm not going to translate that. Rashi will help us understand this term, right? Pray urve, be fruitful and multiply. Goy, a nation, or kahal gohim, and kahal we translate often as congregation, right? Something like that. Group of nations. Yeh mimeka will come out of you. Umelachim and kings, mechalatzecha from your loins, yetzu will come forth from your loins. So, a couple of items in this sentence that beg some interpretation here. So let's start out with El Shaddai, right? Let's take a look at that. Rashi, right into it. Ani El Shaddai. So this word Shaddai, She'ani Kidai. So this Shaddai is like an abbreviation of She'ani Kidai, that I am worthy, I am sufficient, levarech, to bless Shehabrachot Sheli, because the source of blessing comes from me. Uh, since we're talking about this word brachot, right, which we translate as blessing, I've said many times now in this class that essentially, if the first time we come across this word bracha is when God blesses the animals and human beings and says, be fruitful and multiply. So that the idea of the term bracha has the concept of plenitude. It has that basic meaning, plenitude. So when we say this word Baruch that we use so constantly, it's one of the first words you learn when you study Hebrew prayer, because all the all the blessings start with Baruch Atah Hashem. What does this word Baruch really mean? That is not so obvious. And throughout my life, I've been trying to come to understand what this word Baruch means. So here, in some ways, this little sentence of Rashi's is saying that God is the source of everything that we have. But Baruch is a passive form. It means you are Baruch. That is, God, you are the one who is Baruch. And I think what it is trying to connote, and it's something that has developed in my mind as I've gotten older, is the idea that in fact this world is suffused with the divine presence. I'm not a pantheist. I don't identify the physical world with the divine, but I am saying that, as a friend of mine, Yossi Gordon, mentioned, he introduced me to the term panentheist, meaning that the world itself is suffused with the divine, but God transcends it as well. That God is beyond this world, but also pervades the world, and trying to see all the different elements in nature and its vastness and its complexity and its brilliance, etc., as being in some ways a reference back to its divine presence. And in some ways, somebody came up recently and sort of said, well, fish aren't aware of water. The idea that the world is so suffused with the divine presence that we don't realize it. It is there. It is so Baruch, right? The world is so Baruch with the divine presence that we don't realize it. And some of this actually came, I know I'm probably editorializing a little bit too much, but regardless, um, this thought started to develop in my mind when we were counting Omer. And there's some meditations regarding the Omer that try to speak about the significance of the letters and also the idea of the space around the letters, that they're all suffused with the divine presence. And I think on a practical level, that what was helpful about this for me is that so often I feel I'm not concentrating sufficiently on my prayers and I'm blanking out or flooding, but realizing just the very activity has has importance to it. So if you want to comment, I'd be happy to take it. I went on quite a bit about that. All right, we'll go on with this. Okay. Yeah. Question, yes, Judith.
Um, where am I? Sorry. Um, so one of my questions was where you said to die, but
Hmm.
then the other question is um, relates to I was in this place and God was in this place and
Yes,
I don't know that.
right.
That doubling of the I is, I think really conveys that it's like I'm waking up
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
um, it was there all the time, but I didn't
Yes,
notice it.
right,
Um,
right. Yeah, I mean, it could be just a great statement for all of us to recognize the divine being in that place. Of course, that's much earlier passage, right, in the previous parsha, where he has the vision of the angels, etc., going up and down.
yeah.
And here we're making a reference to the wrestling that he had with the angel here. So,
Hmm.
okay. Um, I'm going to go on with this, and we may have dealt with this the last time because I noticed my arrow is here, right? But I did want to go over this a little bit, right? So it's interesting that it says, be fruitful and multiply. Well, at this point in Jacob's life, how many children does he have? Hmm. He has 11 children. He's only going to have one more. But he's saying, right? So Rashi is picking up on that. Why is God telling him now, be fruitful and multiply? He's only going to have one more child, right? Al Shem she'adayin lo nolad binyamin. He's saying because Benjamin had not been born yet, v'af al pi shekvar nit'abra mimenu, and despite the fact that Rachel was already, she had already conceived, she was already pregnant. Okay. So I am going to skip now because we did do this in the previous lesson. So I'm going to, but we hadn't finished it up. That's what happened, right? So Goy ukahal goyim, right? A nation and a community, let's call it a community of nations. Shegoyim atidim panav le'asot, because in the future, right, in the atidim, in the future, his sons would produce nations, keminyan hagoyim, according to the number of nations, right? Shehem shivim, which are 70 umot nations. Shivim umot. So we have a tradition after Noah, right, in counting the genealogy after Noah of coming up with 70 distinct nations when God split the population of the world into various nations. And so there were 70, Jacob had 70 children and grandchildren, etc. And that matched the number of nations in the world. Again, this is part of the reason why I love to look at this material as literature, right? Because of the symbolism. Going on. V'chein, and likewise, kol hasin Sanhedrin shivim, and the number of individuals who comprised the great court, the highest court, was 70. So again, the significance there of the court, the highest court being the ultimate seat of justice, and the idea that it is justice on which the world is founded. One of the things that the world is founded is on justice. Davar acher, another interpretation, different way of looking at this. She'atidim banav hakriv b'sha'at isur habamot. It's an interesting take here, that in the future, his descendants would offer up at a time when the shrines were forbidden. So for a little bit of background about this. So before the temple came into existence, and I'm talking about Solomon's temple that was finally created, right? And of course, the Israelites, so the Jewish people, had been in the land of Israel and settled in the land of Israel for quite a few years now, right? I mean, really, the period of Judges, the monarchy of Saul, the monarchy of David, and not until then did Solomon actually succeed in building the temple. So before the temple was built, there were legitimate shrines. The Israelites were allowed to offer up there were certain cities where there were shrines where the Kohanim would offer up sacrifices. They were local shrines. Once the temple was built, these shrines became prohibited. But this was a change. And people were not used to this. After all, at one point it was allowed, now it wasn't allowed. And in fact, when you read through the book of Kings, you find a lot of problems with this, in that they continued to offer up at these shrines. Right, so it says at a time, isur habamot means at the prohibition of these shrines, kegoyim of de kochavim. The idea was that the idolaters had shrines all over the place, right? And here it talk about goyim, and here referring to goyim as idolaters. Bimei Eliyahu, during the days of Elijah. Elijah lived during the time of the king Ahab primarily. Right, and he says over Rashi Ashan. So some early manuscript of Rashi included this interesting, somewhat negative understanding of this prophecy. Right? Okay, going on. Ve'et haaretz asher natati la'Avraham u'leYitzchak, and the land which I have given to Abraham and to Isaac. L'cha etnena, I will give it to you, ulezaracha acharecha, and to your seed after you, eten et haaretz, I will give the land. There are so many references to the idea of the descendants of Jacob having the land. of Israel. And as you see to this day, it is very important and yet a source of great turmoil and sadly, fighting and death, etc., etc. And but it's so interesting that here we have in the Torah many, many times the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. But what I think people miss is that the whole idea of the Jewish people being, remember, before they received the Ten Commandments, God says a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Is the idea of the temple being built there and the temple representing a connection between the divine and humanity. And that is really the yearning and the dream that there should be a connection between heaven and earth. And that in that temple, in the worship of the temple, and in being worthy, right, worthy of that worship, that in some ways that is the title that the Jewish people have to the land, because ultimately the Torah lets us know we own nothing. We own nothing. And very clear about the fact that our relationship to the land of Israel, we have to be worthy of it. And that's why we were dispersed and thrown out of the land, because we did not understand the relationship we had to have to it. It isn't simply a matter of military power. It is a matter of spiritual power. And I'd go a step further and say spiritual responsibility. Now, how we try to interpret that in terms of the times in which we live isn't so simple. But I would say, I don't know that it ever was simple, but it has to start off with some sense of justice and generosity and compassion and kindness. Kindness. So going on. We don't have anything on that one. All right. Vayal me'alav Elohim, and God arose from him, right? Bamakom, in the place Asher Diber, in the place where he had spoken ito with him. Rashi makes a personal comment. He has made this one relatively recently before. Bamakom Asher Diberito, in the place where he spoke with him, Rashi personally says, Eini yodea ma melamdenu. I do not know what this is here to teach us. So I obviously it's going through my mind as to what perhaps it is trying to teach us. And of course, you're going to see that there are similarities between this experience that Jacob is having here and the experience that he had on his way to Haran, right? That there's a certain level of parallelism between his going to Haran, where he has this vision of the ladder with the angels going up and down, right? And being aware of God's presence. And this particular passage. And the fact that it says, uses the language of specifically, Vayal me'alav Elohim, that God went up from him. I wonder to myself, if that's sort of in some ways, an echo of the angels going up and down that ladder before. And you'll see, um, I'm gonna anticipate and tell you he's gonna call this place Bethel. Well, what did he call that place when he was on his way to Haran? He called it Bethel. So do we consider it the same thing? Yes, question, comment? Okay, all right. Sorry, it's hard to hear you.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, mate.
I think it's simply part of the narrative continuity.
Mm-hmm.
God appears, God leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
otherwise you'd be asking yourself, what happened to God?
Well, if it had just said God departed, we would not have, that's true. It could be saying that, God's presence may have departed in that particular location, if that's what you're implying.
That's what I
That's,
am. Yes.
but I don't know. The point is, it's not like a deep from on a without trying to sort of analyze this more carefully, it's hard to understand what the Torah is trying to teach us here.
And that's what Rashi
Yeah,
says.
that is what Rashi is saying. Yes, yes. And look at this. Here, we're going on to the next thing, right? Vayatsev Yaakov matzeva. Jacob erected a monument, a pillar, b'makom asher diber ito, in the place where he spoke with him, matzevet even, a pillar of stone, vayasech aleha nesech, and he poured libations upon it, vayitzok aleha shamen, and he also poured or anointed it with oil, poured oil on it too. What did he do at Bethel when he on his way? Remember, he gathered the stones that were at his head, and he made a monument from them, etc., etc. I told you, there's definite parallel passages here, right? And here we go. Vayikra Yaakov et Shem HaMakom, and Jacob called the place, the name of the place, Asher Diber Ito Sham, Elohim, where the Lord had spoken with him, Beit El. Beit El again. Is it a different Beit El? Is it the same Beit El? And in fact, the tradition is that Jacob recognized that this Beit El is actually Jerusalem. That what happened, the way the language is in Vayetze, in the previous Parsha, right? Because he says he left Beersheba and he went to Haran. And then it comes back to something else. So they're understanding it literally as that he did go to Haran, and then he realized he had skipped over the place where the temple was going to be built, and he went back, and that's where he had that vision of the angels going up and down. And again, the idea of the temple being a place where there is the divine presence that is alighting and coming down into the world, and human prayer, human service that is going up to heaven, right? And so again, would appear to be another reference to Jerusalem, to ultimately the place. And certainly calling it the house of God, totally sounds like Jerusalem and the function of that particular place. Let me make sure I'm covering Rashi's. I think I am. Let's just take a look. Yep, yep. Let's keep going. All right. Vayisu mi Beit El. And they journeyed from Beit El. Vahi od kivrat haaretz lavo Ephrata. And there was still a kivrat haaretz. And we'll see how this passage these particular words are to be understood. And there's some disagreement as to how we are to understand it. So there still was a kivrat haaretz to come to Ephrat. Vateled Rachel, and Rachel gave birth. Vatikash belidata, and she had difficulty in her birth, in her giving birth. So interesting. He's just been blessed by God. He's just had an act of divine worship, and this is what's happening to him. And of course, we'll take a look at the Rashi because he's going to deal with this Kivrat Haaretz, but also the idea we are totally being set up for the story of Joseph, right? And the idea that Jacob is going to lose Rachel, and that is going to set him up to be even closer to Joseph than he might have been otherwise. And we were set up before this, even in being told that he fell in love. He set eyes on Rachel and fell deeply in love with her. And now he's losing her in childbirth. How ironic. And of course, ultimately, he is going to lose Joseph. And there's just some deep, deep psychological and spiritual issues going on. But it's so interesting that this is happening right after God has just blessed him, right? Interesting that where this is placed. So, what's it telling us in terms of mortality and this life that we're in, and the degree of pleasure and enjoyment we're entitled to? Let's take a look at Kivrat Haaretz here. Kivrat Haaretz. Menachem, right? We've had Menachem a couple of times. Piresh. So this is somebody Rashi's learned from. Piresh, he explains Lashon Kavir. So this word, or Kabir, and that is mighty, right? It has the meaning of mighty or great. Ribui Mahalach Rav. In other words, we're talking about a great distance. That's how Menachem understands it. They had a long way to go to Ephraim. That's how Menachem is explaining this. The Agadah, and there's Midrashim, there's legends, Bisman, that this is a time, Sha'aretz Chalula Amenukevet, this would be a time when the earth was hollow and punctured, Kivra, there's the Kivrat, right, like a sieve. In other words, there were holes and the earth was soft, etc. Again, though, question, so what? What's it saying? I mean, is it just simply trying to give us a time, as you'll see, Bereshit Rabbah from the Midrash, Shehanir Matsui, sorry, let me see. I think this is okay. Uh, okay. So Hanir Matsui means that, I think it means that plowing is easy. It's easy to plow. Hastav Avar, winter has passed, right? Remember, and winter is the time in Mediterranean climates when there's rain, so the ground is soft. V'hashrav adain lo ba, and hot weather hasn't come yet. Ve'ein ze pshuto shel mikra. But this idea of translating kivrat haaretz as, time when the earth was like a sieve, etc., is not the pshat. That's not the simple meaning of the scripture. Sha'arei, because we see the Naaman was the name of an Assyrian general who was stricken with leprosy. This is in the book of Kings, and he lives in the time of Elisha the prophet. And he is stricken with leprosy. He's like the main general of the Assyrians, and they have a servant who mentions that there's this prophet Elisha who has amazing abilities, and the general goes to see him, etc. And Elisha tells him to go bathe in the Jordan, and he'll be cured of his leprosy. And it's a wonderful story, actually. And he starts off by saying, well, aren't there better rivers up in Assyria? But he finally decides he's going to do it. He bathes in the Jordan, and of course, guess what? Right? He is cured of his leprosy. And what's so beautiful is he decides to believe in God. At that point, he's transformed into a believer. So there's other details about the story that are worth reading. Naaman, that's the guy's name. Matzinu, we find in that story, and here's the chapter. It's second book of Kings, Melachim Bet, chapter 5. Vayelech meito, and he went from him, Kivrat Aretz. There's the thing. He went him a Kivrat Aretz from him. For Omer Ani, and Rashi says, and so I think, Shehu Shem Midat Karka, that this Kivrat Haaretz is actually a measurement of land. It's a measurement of distance. Kamo Mahalach Parsa, just like a Parsa parasang, right? A distance of a parasang, right? O Yoter Kamor. Yes? Is that Morris?
Yeah, I've got to get off.
Okay.
See you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Parsa or yoter, parasang or more, kamosha ata omer, and similar to one says, tzemed keren, right? This is a distance. Tzemed keren literally means a group of vines, right? Chelkat sadeh, a section of a field. That it's a section of a field is a tzemed keren. Kach b'mahalach Adam. So when a person is walking, when a person is traveling, noten shem midah, you can give a term for a distance. How far did he walk? Karka, that is midah karka, the length of the measurement of land, kamo mahalach mil, just like you say, a mile's journey. Kivrat haaretz, that's the term, kivrat haaretz. It's a technical term meaning a specific distance. And this is probably where we should stop for today. So I'll put in the mark. And excuse me 1 second. Let's put this here. And if there are any comments for the record, I'm happy to take them. Sorry, I will maybe do this once we stop. All right.
I only thought it interesting
Yes.
and a little curious that verse 12, which referred to obviously the promise of the land,
Yes.
is absent from Rashi's commentary.
And why do you think that is curious?
Um, because obviously it's a foundational aspect to the Jewish faith that this was land that was given, and he does. Maybe it's so self-evident he doesn't need to comment on it. I mean, that's I guess one way around it.
I think you just hit it. Okay. First of all, it's mentioned many times.
Yes,
Secondly, Zitzin Laban, Rashi's living at a time when the Jewish people don't have the land, right? It's
absolutely.
not under
Yes.
their control.
Yep.
So we never had these problems until we tried to have it as Israelite territory, right? There
Mhm.
was no one to challenge us when we didn't have it to begin with.
Right.
So Rashi doesn't have to prove a point, but I will tell you that the very first Rashi, one of the earliest Rashis in Genesis, actually discusses this issue as
Okay.
to because there is a moral question as to by what right did the Jewish people or the Israelites take over the land of Canaan? This is not a new question. It goes along with the whole issue, and there's a beautiful, beautiful Rashi commentary on this. That's based on a midrash, by the way. Rashi again primarily is quoting other, but just putting it in a
Right.
way that we can understand it. So this is
Mhm.
an issue. So he, in some ways, I could say he really has dealt with it already, right at the very beginning.
Sure.
And as you said, this is mentioned so many times that he has no need to expand on it any further. So
Okay.
I think, yeah.
I
But I'm glad you're,
guess no,
but
I'm
me,
looking at it as sort of proto-Zionism.
yes. Well, there's enough there. There's enough there.
Yes.
And
Yes. Okay.
okay, so let me stop the recording with this.